Hello, thrill seekers. Welcome to Real Crime Stories, the channel that plunges you into the heart of spine-chilling mysteries, true crime cases, and unsolved enigmas that defy explanation. Today, we're unraveling a gripping collection of stories that will haunt your thoughts. If you're hooked on suspense and can't get enough of these eerie tales, smash that subscribe button and ring the notification bell to never miss a video. Now, brace yourself, let's dive into the first bone-chilling story. We didn't kill Aiden Pond. It was just supposed to be a prank. A fucking joke. That was it. Hell, it was all fucking Derek's idea, not mine, and not anyone else's. We just wanted to fuck with him, you know? Screw around. That's it. I swear. I swear. Fine. Let me start from the beginning. There was this guy back in high school, Aiden Pond. Everyone knew that he was kinda... shit, what's the word here? I don't know. Whatever. He was prone to tantrums, though. Like, you could push this guy just a little bit and he'd flip out on you. I'm talking a full meltdown here. It was funny as shit. He'd start screaming, swearing, and get all red in the face. Sometimes he'd even cry. My buddies Derek, Jeremy, and I used to tease him a little. We were just having some fun, it wasn't that serious or anything. He just blew it all out of proportion. Like that thing with the mouse? We just wanted to screw with him a little. Jeremy had caught a mouse outside, and we thought it would be funny to put it in his desk. So yeah, that's what we did, and it was fucking funny. Aiden got in, opened the desk to put his binder in, and started losing his shit when he saw the mouse. He must have jumped like a foot in the air. It was hilarious. Then he saw us laughing and put the pieces together. He started crying and yelling at us, telling us what assholes we were. That's what got the teacher involved, and naturally, Aiden squealed. We got detention for the next 3 days. I still figured it was all worth it, but Derek was pissed. I guess he thought that Aiden had overreacted or something. I don't know, but he wanted to get even with him. So he suggested we egg his house. We'd got some eggs, and were heading over a little after school when we saw Aiden. There was a path that runs along the woods out behind the school. I knew that Aiden usually walked home that way, so it wasn't that surprising that we saw him. It was kinda late to be leaving school, but he was part of a few after-school groups, so I guess it wasn't that weird for him. I remember that he saw us up ahead on the trail. We didn't have any time to hide without looking more suspicious, and he just sorta slowed down once he recognized us, watching us carefully as he did. I knew that he had to see the egg carton in Derek's hands, and I remember thinking that the gig was up. But I guess Derek wasn't ready to give up just yet, though. Nope. Like I said, I think he took the whole detention thing a little too personally. Once Aiden saw us, Derek probably figured that he'd catch on to what we were up to and squeal on us. Even if we hadn't done it yet, he'd still squeal. That was just the way he was. So I imagine he just thought, in for a penny, in for a pound. Before he even threw the first egg, Aiden was screaming like a little kid for him to stop. Derek didn't care. He just kept fucking throwing eggs at him like a goddamn caveman. Aiden put his hands up to try and cover his face. He backed away, stumbling towards the woods for cover. I saw him spitting out bits of yolk in between his angry screams, saying shit like, "Fuck you guys, I'm gonna fucking kill you, fuck you." Derek didn't give a shit. He just kept throwing eggs, and by that point, Jeremy and I had gotten in on the action too. Aiden kept trying to blindly run towards the woods. I don't think he realized how steep the incline off the path into the forest was. Maybe we could have stopped him from falling. Maybe. Truth be told though, I don't think any of us cared. I think we wanted him to fall, just because it would have been funny to watch. I think we all just expected Aiden to tumble down into the woods, get up and start screaming at us again. Then we'd run off and probably get in more trouble later. God, we were all so fucking stupid. Aiden fell all right. He went right down that incline and into the woods. Derek, Jeremy, and I all watched, laughing our asses off the whole time. We laughed and laughed and laughed, and Aiden just lay there in a heap of limbs on the ground. We looked down at him, our laughter slowly getting quieter until suddenly it stopped being so funny. Aiden should have gotten up by then. He should have been red in the face and swearing at us. But he wasn't. He was just lying there, still, silent. Jeremy was the first one to call out to him. but there was no response. After a few seconds of trying that, he went down. I followed. Derek stayed behind, watching in the vain hope that Aiden would simply get up, get mad, and everything would be okay again. We made our way down the incline. We turned Aiden onto his back. He wasn't moving. His eyes were closed. His nose was bleeding. That's when we started panicking. We didn't know what a dead body looked like, so we couldn't be sure. We didn't think to check his pulse or check to see if he was breathing. We just panicked. Derek came down around that point while we freaked out, thinking we just fucking killed Aiden Pond. We didn't know what to do. Should we just leave him there? Let someone else find him? Play dumb? No. What if they caught us? We'd seen enough crime shows to believe that an entire FBI squad would hunt us down individually if we just let them find the body. We considered just dragging him deeper into the woods, but that didn't seem much better. The woods was really just a small patch of forest separating the park from the nearby road. It wasn't exactly the ideal hiding spot for a body. Someone was bound to find him. We had to get rid of the body somehow. And it was Jeremy who gave us the idea. "My dad's not home," he'd said. "We could take him to the backyard." Jeremy's dad owned a landscaping company. He lived on a fairly rural property about a few miles away. It wouldn't be that long of a walk to get there, and he kept most of his heavier equipment in the backyard: lawn mowers, chainsaws, hedge trimmers, and a wood chipper. We'd helped Jeremy's dad with the wood chipper plenty of times. When his clients wanted brush taken off their property, he'd usually load it into his truck, bring it home, and toss it into the wood chipper. We knew how to use it, and considering the predicament we were in, it seemed like a good idea at the time. We carried Aiden all the way to Jeremy's house. Well, I carried him. I'm the one who got volunteered for it since I was the biggest. I put him on my back like it was a piggyback ride. I remember feeling the uncomfortable weight of him as I carried him. I remember feeling the disgust in my stomach as I thought about how Aiden was probably already decaying. We cut through a few fields and patches of woods to avoid running into anyone. Looking back at everything, I don't really know how the hell we didn't get caught. Dumb luck, maybe? Or maybe the world's just a quieter, less nosy place than we all think it is. When you're trying to hide something, you'll always feel eyes on you even when there aren't any. Once we got to Jeremy's house, we worked fast. He got the keys to his dad's shed, and we wheeled the wood chipper out. We took it into the forest for some privacy. Then we did what we came to do. Jeremy started up the wood chipper, and once it was going, Derek and I lifted Aiden up. We were going to put him in feet first. Just as we were ready to let him drop into the spinning blades, I saw his face move. I saw his eyelids flutter. And in the moment before we put him in, I felt a spike of horror rising from my stomach as I realized that we didn't kill Aiden Pond. I wish I could have said something. I wish I could have stopped it. But I didn't have time. No, that's bullshit. I know it's bullshit. I could have said something. I could have stopped it. Any fucking one of us could have. But as soon as Aiden's feet went into the wood chipper and he started screaming, we all knew that we weren't going back. We'd already gone too far. Sure, we could have stopped it. Maybe we could have saved his life. But the fact that we'd gone this far already would have already ruined our lives. We were only 15, and we knew that much to be true. So, we did the only thing that made sense. We let him go. Aiden struggled and thrashed, tried to grab the edges of the wood chipper to keep himself from going in. But we forced him in. He screamed and he cried. The sounds he made. Oh God. The fucking sounds he made. The sounds the wood chipper made as it tore him apart. I won't ever forget those. Not for the rest of my life. We spent almost an hour out there. By the time the wood chipper had gotten through his legs, Aiden was long gone. His body was pale and limp. There was so much fucking blood. We didn't realize there'd be so much of it. By the time the wood chipper started tearing into his guts, I couldn't take it anymore. I had to run off into the woods to vomit. It tore through his ribcage, gooey chunks of him sticking to the blades. Shortly after that, it jammed. When we couldn't get it to start again, we panicked. Derek took what was left of the body out. Fuck, the mess he made. The bits of Aiden coming out of him. The memory makes me sick. We didn't know what to do. We eventually settled on just burying it. Then it came time to deal with the wood chipper. We hadn't thought this through. We'd thought that maybe there wouldn't be that much blood. We couldn't clean it off, not without taking it back to Jeremy's place, and his mom was definitely home by then. She would have seen us. We decided to just leave it in the woods. Then there was the matter of our bloody clothes. Christ, we didn't know what to do about that. We considered just stripping them off and leaving them in the woods, but no luck. Eventually, we agreed we'd just sneak into Derek's house, borrow some of his clothes, and go home. It didn't work. His mom saw us coming in, and when she did, I remember the way the color drained from her face. She stared at us, covered in blood and shaken from what we'd spent the evening doing. Then she started screaming. I don't blame her. Considering what a piss-poor job we'd done of covering our tracks, the case was closed pretty quickly. Derek refused to talk to the police, but Jeremy and I both cracked almost immediately. No point in lying and digging ourselves into an even deeper pit. The three of us were tried as adults, and that was it. Derek got 25 years, a life sentence. Jeremy and I got 15 each. We served our time in the same prison, but we rarely ever saw each other. I consider myself lucky that I was ever considered eligible for parole. I served 8 years of my sentence. 8 years of my life. Gone. But I still had my youth, more or less. I don't want to talk about prison. I don't want to think about that. I deserved what I got. I know that. We all did. Jeremy and I both tried to shut up and serve our time. Get it over with as painlessly as possible. Juvie wasn't so bad, but when we got transferred to an adult correctional facility, things were a lot rougher. We just kept our heads down and tried to be as close to model prisoners as either of us could be. Derek, on the other hand, chose to be as big a pain in the ass as possible. He was enough of a bastard in juvie that Jeremy and I both started avoiding him, and he only got worse after we were transferred. I didn't see much of him, but I know he spent a lot of time in solitary confinement. Whenever he was allowed back into general population, it was only a matter of months before he'd end up in another fight that would send his ass right back to solitary. Naturally, I wasn't that surprised when he eventually turned up dead. The way I heard it, somebody had gotten into his cell in solitary and fucked him up. Nobody knew who. Nobody even had a good guess. The guards just heard him screaming one night and came in to find him damn near gutted and bleeding out. They couldn't save him, assuming they even bothered to try. I can't say I shed any tears for him. If anything, I was almost glad he was dead. We'd all taken part in what we did to Aiden. We all deserved the blame. But Derek had been the one who'd fucking started it. It had all originally been his idea. And in the years since, I'd always figured he didn't regret what we'd done. He just regretted that we didn't do it better. Me? I just wanted to put it behind me, move on with my life, start over and just become somebody else. I knew it wouldn't change the past. I'd always know what I'd done. I'd never, ever get away from it. I suppose some dumb, juvenile part of me sort of hoped that at the very least Jeremy might get released around the same time I did. I hadn't heard anything about him possibly being up for parole, but who knows, right? I suppose in the end it didn't matter. 2 months before I got out, they found Jeremy lying dead in the showers. I never saw the body, but I heard about the state he was in. Someone had gone to town on him, carving deep gashes in his stomach and legs. They'd apparently damn near torn him open. There was more blood flowing down the drain than there actually was inside of him. They'd figured that someone had jumped him in the shower. Jeremy wasn't really the confrontational sort, but there were some real psychos in that place. All he'd have needed to do was rub the wrong person the wrong way, and that was it. I was sad to hear what had happened to him, but unfortunately, he wasn't the first guy I'd known in that shithole who didn't survive to see parole. And by then we drifted apart enough that I only barely recognized him when I saw him. I still mourned for him a lot more than I did for Derek. But what happened, happened. I accepted it for what it was. After they finally let me out, I started trying to get my life together. I checked in with my parole officer, got a room at a halfway house for guys like me, and started looking for work. I picked up a shitty job washing dishes and made enough money to get by. Honestly, that was good with me. This was what I wanted. The guilt never really went away. Most nights, I'd dream about Aiden, the screams he'd made, the sound of the wood chipper, the blood, the gore. God, Just the memory of it still turned my stomach. But I'd long since learned to live with all that. I've been out of prison for about 8 months now. I've been trying to get by, trying to get my life in order and salvage what I've made of it. But now, I don't think I can. I came home from work a couple of days ago at around midnight. I walked up the stairs to my room at the halfway house, changed into my pajamas, and tried to relax. My evening plans were to eat, jerk off, sleep, and get up somewhat early the next morning to jog. Same as I did just about every day. I'd made myself a PB&J and been getting comfy on my single bed as I looked out my little window onto the street below. I watched some of the cars pass on the street and let myself zone out a little as I decompressed after a long shift. I didn't pay much attention to it when I noticed movement on the street. I just sort of stared thoughtlessly into the void for a bit before realizing that there was something down on the road, crawling around. I figured it was just a dog at first, since the first glimpse of it I noticed was it passing behind a car parked on the street. I watched it for only a few seconds before deciding it wasn't anything worth paying attention to and going back to my sandwich. About a minute or so later, I saw whatever it was coming out from under the car and looked down to satisfy my mild curiosity. Although the longer I looked at it, the less sure I was as to what it was. It only had 2 legs. It couldn't have been a dog or a cat. Some sort of bird, maybe? No, birds didn't move like that. Whatever this thing was, it crawled along on the ground, and the shape of it almost looked like the top half of a person. I blinked in disbelief, trying to make sense of what I was seeing. There's no way that could be true. No fucking way. But the longer I looked, the more sure I was. It was the top half of a person, dragging itself along the ground. A man by the looks of it. No, a teenage boy. I felt a sense of dread growing in my stomach as I realized that what I was looking at wasn't just a trick of my eyes. Looking back, I'm not sure how I didn't recognize him immediately. Maybe the sheer impossibility of it had made me dismiss it outright, but I couldn't deny what was staring me right in the face. Aiden Pond was crawling towards my building. Well, half of him was. I watched him move, my eyes widening in disbelief as my stomach tied itself in knots. I saw his face, pale and bloodless as he looked up at me, his eyes wide and sightless. I watched as he reached the wall beneath my window and began to climb. That was when I finally moved, stumbling back and tripping over my own 2 feet to land on my ass. I stared at the window like an idiot, half expecting this to all be some dream. It had to be. I'd probably just dozed off on my bed. Yeah, sure, that had to be it. Please, dear God, tell me that was it. I saw a pale hand with skeletal, claw-like fingers reaching up towards my window. I knew it was real. Aiden Pond rose up to press his face against the glass. His vacant eyes seemed to stare at me. His mouth hung open in a silent scream. God, I could see bits of him hanging off the tattered remains of the bottom half of his torso. I watched him fumble with the edge of my window and realized that he aimed to open it. I stood up, sprinting to the window to try and stop him. I pressed the lock closed. It didn't make any difference. Aiden forced it open. I heard the metal of the lock break. I saw cracked spiderweb across the glass. Aiden lurched forward, almost touching me as he fell into my room. He didn't speak, didn't say a word, didn't even pause to reorient himself. He landed in a graceless heap on the ground and just kept moving, reaching one pale, dead hand out to drag himself even closer. I tried to run. I stumbled back out of my room, looking back at him as I did. He just got closer and closer. Slowly but surely, he dragged himself toward me. I took a few more steps back without thinking. I didn't even realize how close I was to the stairs, not until I was falling. I tumbled backward, my head slamming against one of the steps as I flopped over, crashing against every step as I fell. When I finally hit the ground, I lay there waiting. I could see Aiden at the top of the stairs, watching me with his cold, dead eyes. I tried to move my legs, but the pain was too much. All I could do was scream. White bone jutted out of my broken skin. I wouldn't be walking again anytime soon, so I tried to drag myself away. Using my arms to pull myself forward, I dragged myself away from the visage of Aiden that hunted me, tears streaming down my cheeks all the while. I didn't move nearly as fast as he did, and though he didn't make a sound, I knew he was getting closer. Down a nearby hallway, I could see lights come on. I could see doors opening as some of the other guys came out to investigate the noise. I vaguely remember screaming at them to run when one of them approached me to ask if I was okay. I tried to point to the ghost behind me, but when they looked, there was nothing there. Aiden was gone. I've spent the last few days in the hospital. The doctor says I'll make a full recovery. I don't believe that. I don't think I'll leave this building alive. He's never there when anyone else is in the room, but when I'm alone, I can see him in the shadows, under beds, in the corners, watching me, waiting. I think about Jeremy and Derek a lot. I wonder if this was how their final days were. I wonder why he saved me for last, but I suppose it doesn't really matter why. I'm scared of what will happen soon. I'm afraid to die, but I know that this is what I deserve. I did something terrible. I was just as much to blame as Derek and Jeremy were. Aiden deserves his revenge. Story. I'm a forensic psychiatrist, and I can't forget patient file number 1917, the woman who allegedly lived in the land of forgotten selves. If you think you already know where this is going, you'd better brace yourself because it's worse. After over 30 years as a forensic psychiatrist, I'm retiring and started writing a book about my stories. I even made some interviews with families of former patients to see how things went in the long run. Back in the day, I was the only woman with a crime-related job in the county, and of course the police threw me the worst possible cases, so they could use my gender to justify when I failed. The most normal patients I had were people who lost it and tried to murder their family because they were pretty sure that their target was A doppelganger, B, a commie, or C, a commie doppelganger. But still, among all this oddity, patient number 1917, hereby named Rebecca, is a story that still intrigues and fascinates me. Rebecca was 36 years old when I met her. We were about the same age, which I think was a factor that helped us connect. She had been arrested after stabbing her twin sister 28 times. I still have a copy of Rebecca's patient tapes to help my memory. The story I'm about to tell is not an exact transcription. I possibly couldn't, for reasons that will become clear later. But, in broad strokes, is the content of our conversations. The police wanted to know whether she was imputable or had to be sent to a criminal mental ward, and I had 5 weeks to determine it before her trial. As usual, I started by making the patient feel comfortable around me. I complimented her beautiful auburn hair and how tall she was, remarked that we were around the same age, even though she didn't look like it, and made a joke regarding a toy from our childhood. I then introduced the topic of her family on our conversation, asking if she had a history of mental illness and such. When Rebecca was mildly uncomfortable, I struck her with a crucial question. Do you hate your twin sister? Rebecca then started to freak out and scream that she had no twin sister, and who she killed was merely an imposter who took her life, her husband, and her job. Week 1 showed no progress, but I at least got to establish how she was. Before seeing her again, I made sure to interview her parents, brother-in-law, the man she believed to be her husband, and 2 former co-workers. All the 5 of them reported the same. Rebecca had always been sort of an airhead, who was known for leaving and not coming back when she said she would, losing jobs constantly, and generally making people worry. They were shocked, concerned, or maliciously amused when I informed them that Rebecca told me that her twin sister stole her job. Apparently, the sister was the branch director to a major decor business, while the most successful that Rebecca had ever been was keeping a job for 2 straight months at Walmart. Due to her issues with organization and commitment, Rebecca had been living with her parents again, despite being a full-blown adult. No one would rent her an apartment because she was known for never paying. I once took pity in her and let her be my roommate. It was hell, one of the former co-workers, let's call her Anna, explained to me. I think her parents only took her in out of guilt. As her mother made a difficult face, her father explained that Rebecca was probably this way because they had another kid who died as a baby, and, in their grief, maybe they neglected her, even though her sister turned out perfectly. I think she fought really hard to be so well adjusted, the mother added. So Rebecca had been living with her elder parents for a while. Then, a few months earlier, she suddenly disappeared. Since she constantly gave her family this sort of shit, no one was exactly concerned. We thought she was couch surfing or something, her brother-in-law explained. It wouldn't be the first time. She's an adult, and she knows how to stab people if she wants to, so why should we worry? It was clear that everyone thought Rebecca was unreliable and a general burden, so they decided that she would benefit from taking some time alone and learn how to manage herself. After thoroughly getting their side of the story, I saw Rebecca again. Thinking about what her family and friends said, it struck me as odd that her looks were as flawless as they could be. Her hair was always beautifully arranged, her clothes were tidy, her nails were clean. She looked very much like someone who's got their shit together. This Rebecca in front of me didn't seem at all like the disheveled and unstable woman that people described. She looked way more like the successful branch director that she claimed to be. After a bit of small talk to make her more receptive, I asked her what seemed to me like the most crucial question at the moment. If your sister is an imposter, why do people still remember you? Because she implanted fake memories about a fake me on people, she replied. I had felt a spark of hope that her uncanny story could be true, but this sentence poured water on it. Maybe the men were right and I was too emotional for the job. Tell me more about the land of forgotten selves, I asked then. During weeks 2 and 3, Rebecca described in rich detail the place she had been during her time missing. It didn't sound like any place I knew of in real life, so if she had made it up, she was a hell of a storyteller. I managed to sum up the main points of her report. People fall in there when their real selves are forgotten by others. I was impeccable my whole life, doctor. Great daughter, great wife, great boss. I didn't let people see my struggles. How I only slept 3 hours a night to make sure everything was always perfect. Or how devastated I feel every time someone asks more of me. I'm already giving you the most. But if you serve perfection, you're only expected to keep doing it, maybe overcome it. People aren't grateful anymore. They assume it's your job in life to be spotless. I learned to be this way early in life because my parents were always sad, and I absolutely couldn't bring myself to make them worse. I would never, ever get in trouble or hurt them in any way. I would make them proud. Soon I became addicted to the feeling of being the golden child of the world. I couldn't bear to fail, not even once. I woke up on the wrong side of reality one day. Everything was flipped, like a mirrored image, and most of the things there are just forgotten too. Like Windows Vista, or the movie Jupiter Ascending. Asterisk. Of course, back then those things didn't exist. I'm just using examples that are tantamount to what she said. You walk endlessly. The streets are empty, and there's some sort of sadness hanging in the air. They aren't devastated by war, but everything is covered in ugly graffiti, and there's trash everywhere. The very place is forgotten. Although the streets are empty, you see some people eventually, after walking a lot, but they aren't people. They are immaterial shadows shaped like people. They try to interact with you, and even if you try to, you can't. It's like you're both the boy in the stripped pajamas, but no one else is actually on the other side. Asterisk, once again, a modern equivalent. Sometimes you walk through some ugly forest, lifeless and yellowed too. No matter the scenery, you feel forlorn and small. When the night comes, you'll always find an abandoned storehouse to sleep at, but you have to be careful, because in the dark, the forgotten monsters come out. You have to be very, very quiet and apathetic, because if your sense of self is too strong, you let out a scent that attracts them. It's lonely and maddening. The only thing that kept me going all these months was knowing that eventually someone was bound to remember me. The real me. Someone that only I could do, because I am Rebecca Redacted. And thinking that when I came back, I would finally relax and let myself be good enough as I am. Of course, that made my scent stand out, but I'm very smart, even though I don't look like it now. I soon learned how to control it or hide it. I dreamed of coming back to my husband's arms and sleeping 6 hours a day. That's all I could think of, even when I was hiding from the forgotten monsters or planning something. And of course, I knew how to use a knife. I got myself quite a few of forgotten knives. I had a lot of forgotten objects with me. A forgotten model of analogic camera that was a market failure, clothes belonging to forgotten trends, and even the knowledge of forgotten stories. Unfortunately, I know they were there, but I couldn't bring anything back, not even the stories that once entered my mind. They belong in there. Eventually, I think someone remembered me, because I was back. The things unflipped. I woke up in my house, in my bed, and I caught a glimpse of my husband across the slightly ajar door. As I ran to him, full of joy and ready to hug him and never let go, she was there, the other me, the fake twin, the usurper. I froze, still inside our bedroom, having a panic attack. I stabbed her later that day, after he left, and I was able to sneak out to the kitchen and get a knife to protect myself from the intruder. The way she was there, just standing perfectly still, like she wasn't something entirely alive, the way she grinned to me as I dug the knife over and over into her unnaturally soft but also gooey flesh. I can't forget it, doctor. No matter how people think I'm crazy, I just know that she is not human. It's a relief that she's gone. Her words sent shivers down my spine. She just sounded and acted so sane, so utterly, genuinely terrified. Still, I knew that giving her a no mental illness evaluation meant sentencing her to a long time in regular prison, where her life was sure to be pure hell. No one likes a fratricide, especially in prison for women, where most of them are tough, but are actually there for drug dealing or intentional manslaughter. Could I do that to a woman just because she was sane? Besides, saying in court that Rebecca wasn't mentally ill meant being questioned, having her case reviewed by male psychiatrists, and losing what little credibility I was able to build so far. I also knew that she had no way of proving that her sister was an imposter. But it's impossible to succeed when people want you to fail without using unorthodox methods, so I asked her anyway. The answer was surprising and thrilling. A proof? You know how I told you I couldn't bring anything back? That's not entirely true. Rebecca whispered to me about one thing she was able to come back from the land of forgotten selves with: pictures. It was by the ending of our last meeting, even though it was still week 4. She instructed me where she had hidden a small envelope with a couple of Polaroid-like pictures. All our conversations were recorded, so I could never tell Rebecca that there was a chance she wasn't crazy. I would lose my job for sure, as I'm pretty sure someone was actively spying on us. Still, I secretly made copies of each tape, because her case was just too fascinating, and I didn't want to forget it. I'm glad I did. The photos aren't high quality, she explained. There's a reason why those analog cameras were forgotten. They were awful. But I looked forward to at least catching a glimpse of the fairy tale-ish place where she claimed to be for the past few months. Of course, the pictures could have been taken anywhere, but I know that they weren't. Because later that day I went to Rebecca's house, supposedly her twin house, to retrieve them, giving her husband, brother-in-law, some excuse about the investigation as I rang his doorbell. It took me ages to find the envelope, concealed inside a nearly unperceivable crevice of her box bed, something that would be impossible for Rebecca to notice if it wasn't her own bed, I must say. When I finally found it and was ready to open and see its content, I heard something coming from the window, a humanoid shape, but way too fast. Then I blacked out as soon as I felt something sharp touching the base of my head. I woke up hours later in my own house, and of course the envelope was nowhere to be found. I never got to see the pictures, but not seeing them made me believe Rebecca even more. After that incident, my boss called and requested me to take a day off. He was a stern and sexist man, but in that moment he sounded weird, overly friendly. On the same day, a man in nondescript clothes and big sunglasses came to my house. He and other 3 guys that looked awfully like him searched the whole house, but didn't seem to find anything. I suspect they wanted the copies of my tapes, but being the paranoid type, I had buried them in a location I won't disclose. When I went to work again, a tall older man that made my usually confident boss really nervous and fidgety requested to talk to me. He explained that Rebecca's case wasn't under the county's jurisdiction anymore, and that I should relax a bit and don't let my work get to me. I was then ordered to hand him all the files about Rebecca, and my boss was ordered to send me on a good vacation because I had been under too much stress. Honestly, as I sipped on mimosas in Costa Rica later that week, I thought someone was coming to kill me, but it didn't happen. It took me years to realize that killing some younger female forensic psychiatrist would be so much more suspicious than disregarding what she said, if she ever said something. I didn't. I kind of doubted my own sanity for a while, but decided to move on, telling myself that the only joy in life is that there are things we'll never comprehend. Things that will remain mysterious because our fancy monkey brains can't grasp it. From time to time, I snooped around to see if I could find anything about Rebecca, but I didn't find anything about her crime, her trial, or even her life. All her record had been erased, and it was like she never existed. I tried to contact her family or friends, but her parents had passed, as they were already pretty old. Her husband, brother-in-law moved to another country, and both her former co-workers had very common names and were impossible to track, especially because I had to track them from memory, since their names were never mentioned in the tapes. I looked into her twin's medical files too. Let's call the twin Patricia. Around the time that Rebecca stabbed her 28 times, Patricia was admitted on the hospital for being attacked by an unknown person in a robbery gone wrong. However, she survived. I then looked more into Patricia's files. There was nothing else about her, except for her birth certificate, with a small note added by hand. Stillborn twin. For years and years, I tried to be very low profile as I tried to trace the grave or cremation report of the stillborn. If Patricia was an imposter, and if Patricia could manipulate memories, it would be easy to convince her parents that both the twins had lived. Or was Rebecca the dead baby, and actually a delusional angst ghost? I don't think I'll ever know, but I'm allowed to conjecture and choose to believe in what makes sense to me. Except nothing does. Just today I was walking to my car on the grocery store parking lot when a woman bumped on me. Based on her hands, I assumed she was in her mid-50s like me, but as I looked up, she was taller than me. I recognized her face. It was Rebecca, except it was probably Patricia, because she had a long scar on the side of her neck. She grinned to me in a way that made my stomach sink, and touched my shoulder to apologize, in a way that felt too rehearsed, too intentional. Her skin was unnaturally soft, but also gooey. Story. The police arrested a man that was covered in blood. I was sent to interview him, and his tale chilled me to the core. I work for the blog section of a local newspaper, and, being new and young, I often get sent out on crappy assignments. My top pieces involve interviews with poodle groomers, sewage plant managers, and our local clown. Quitting's not really an option in this job market, so I've stuck it out. My manager has noticed my dedication, I suppose, so he threw me a bone today. I was sent to interview a man who residents had seen being taken into the police station in handcuffs. The only thing the concerned citizens knew for sure was that he was a stranger, and he was splattered in blood. The police weren't talking. On my way over there, I thought I'd finally gotten my foot in the door. This was a wild card. It could be nothing, or I could end up famous overnight. I was genuinely excited. Now, I just feel shaken and distressed. "Hey, aren't you Rob's kid?" a vaguely familiar policeman asked as I entered the lobby of their decently sized station. I shook off the torrential rain still dripping from my hair and nodded. Constant recognition was one of the weird benefits of returning to my small town after college. Yep, I'm here on behalf of the dispatch, to interview the man that was just brought in. His chubby jolliness faded into grim distaste. He paused a full 5 seconds before finally replying. "I don't think a good kid like you needs to be talking to that guy." I politely began the spiel my manager had given me, even as I got my writing materials out of my pack. It was important to look as if I was proceeding, despite the refusal. I didn't actually know if I was legally allowed in, but I acted like I was. Well, it's my job, and he has the right to visitors, so... "Yeah," he said flatly, cutting me off with an understanding sigh. "Just don't let him get to you." He led me back through a couple dingy hallways. The back held the temporary cells, and he unlocked the first gate. "Grayson's in the last cell. I'll wait here." "Okay." I entered by myself, moving past a series of gated cells. The last contained the only person in lockup. His once decent business wear was splattered in blood, yes, but he was not at all the image of violence I'd imagined. Tall, lanky, and topped by thinning blonde hair. He looked every bit an average businessman. If he'd had glasses, he might have been an exact match for one of my professors back at the university. For a moment, I felt let down. It didn't seem likely that there would be any sort of incredible story here, just some sort of mix-up. I suppose you want my story? Yeah, I thought so. After much consideration, I do think that I should tell somebody what happened. I'm aware of how it sounds, so I've mostly shut up until now, but I'll tell you what I haven't told the police. That'll satisfy my ethical obligation. It's the least required, and the most I'm willing to do because of the social risk. You'll believe me, you're young and look sharp, but most won't. I have no intention of ending up in an institution. Don't smile, I'm serious. Thank you. Now, I do have to say that this all began quite some time ago. I was young, then younger than you. The memories came back to me with the fog of very early youth, likely preteen. They were nightmares, you see. They haunted me for nearly a year. It was a thing, and my mother and father tried their best to find treatment for me. The nightmares went away only after I briefly joined the church, but I still chalk that up to coincidence. The religion thing is a whole nother debate I've no energy to get into. It's 30 years later, give or take. I'm driving cross-country on business with my partner. What business am I in? It's not relevant to what happened. Smith and I were driving cross-country when we stopped at a dilapidated motel right outside a small town. We'd seen absolutely nothing but Midwestern farm fields for hours, so we took a walk into town to get some beer. Glenworth Heights could have been any other town. Looked like a million others, and looked like yours. But as I walked into this town, you see, this is why I mentioned my childhood nightmares. I had the oddest sensation of déjà vu. Standing on that short main street, I felt like I recognized that particular pattern of storefronts. 45 people, that's what the sign said. Glenworth Heights, population 45. It was a stopover on the way from somewhere to somewhere else, and nothing more. But I'd seen those buildings before, cast in another light and another context. I'd seen them in nightmare. I'd seen the sky bleeding. I'd seen these buildings rotting. Their inhabitants had dwelled within, maimed, misshapen, mutated. Smith had a good sense for when I was spooked. I remained tense, but tried to shrug off the strange feeling and allay his concerns. Whatever mask of calm I managed to put on, it certainly fell away as we entered the liquor store. I'd called to mind the clerk's face before I'd gone inside. I'd told myself that he couldn't possibly be in there. I'd had a nightmare over 30 years ago about a 20-something hippie type whose facial skin had been carefully excised in front of me by steaming hooks. In that dream world, his bleeding cheek and jaw muscles had been exposed to the air, but he'd continued working the front under threat of even worse torture at the hands of the store's owner, who had become some sort of hissing acidic monstrosity that lurked in the back room. His hooked limbs dripped acid, and, Lord, I can't even describe. Forgive me, I just need a moment. All right, where was I? The clerk. I'd called his face to mind, keeping it firmly in my mental view, and I was greeted with that exact face as I entered the store. I couldn't help but stare. Perhaps I'd been to this town as a child on some sort of family road trip, and perhaps I might have had nightmares about it later. But how could I have dreamed, 30 years ago, about a clerk that was here now? The store owner lurked in the back room, a thuggish man in a yellowed white shirt who lounged near a fan. I left the store immediately, and Smith knew something was up. He began to get belligerent. I assured him everything was fine. He knew I needed the money from our business trip to pay off my shrew ex-wife's onerous child support lien. I wasn't going to welch. But there was another concern on my mind. I'd stumbled into a waking link to my childhood nightmares, and those nightmares had held a distinct threat. The town in my dreams hadn't simply been horrible for surreal reasons. No, a gaping fissure in the earth had opened somewhere nearby. Through that vast searing crevice, as a child, I'd witnessed people clawing at burning air from rivers of torturous bile, blinding crimson and azure flames that kept thousands perpetually cooking alive. And the screams. Don't frown with disbelief. It was just a nightmare. It was a metaphor, right? For fear, for pain, for change. The townspeople had all changed, and then marched to the gap to worship it, widen it, and bring through demons untold. It was just a dream. Except that I dreamed the location of the fissure. Smith was suspicious of me, so I couldn't ditch him. But I made up a story about checking for money I'd left behind on a previous business trip. We walked out into the sparse woods behind the town, and Smith kept his hand near his gun. But I was far more worried about encountering that hellish rift. I was enormously relieved to find an empty forest glen, and then subtly chilled to realize that I remembered the lay of the jumbled rocks, swaying grasses, and towering trees. I'd seen this place. In a veritable trance, I wandered out into the high grasses. Once I was out in the center, I began to notice that the assembled rocks were strewn about in a pattern that was anything but random. It was a vast circle, and I was within. Bending down, I even found the specific rocks I remember seeing split apart before they'd begun belching flames. Runes. There were runes in the rocks, ancient runes, in a style that looked Native American, or something even older. Smith grinned near me. Then, as I touched the rocks, he'd figured that I'd found the spot where I'd stashed my supposed cash. He'd also figured, since I was far superior to his usual class of partners, that I must have had quite the sum hidden there. He didn't figure that I was also smarter than his usual spick partners. I lifted one of the rund rocks and, well, his skull caved in. He was dead instantly. No, this blood on my shirt isn't from hitting him with a rock, and that's not why they brought me in. That act was self-defense, and I'll prove that in a court of law. Or I'll at least get the jury to understand. A dead thug, and a living well-mannered white man like myself? I'm not worried about it. Don't make that face, I'm just being honest. But no, this isn't that blood on my shirt, because the blood from that impact shot to the earth like it'd been pulled down by strange gravities. In fact, the red liquid spurted out of his head wound like a fountain, arcing right down to those rund rocks before me, and disappearing between. It wasn't nearly all of the blood in his body, but it was enough to be surprising. The rest soaked his clothes and the surrounding ground. Was it simply a nearby death that had reawakened latent energies? Or perhaps I'd accidentally reenacted some ancient ritual. In either case, I found myself standing in exactly the spot I'd dreamed 30 years before, watching that exact nightmare unfold, the ground splitting, flames erupting, and fiery heat radiating against my face as the screams of countless damned souls erupted into the real world. Yes, I'm serious. No, I'm not crazy. I'm completely sane, and that's why I ran. What sane person would have stayed in such a place? Hell itself had partially erupted into a half-mile wide glen in the forest, some ancient ritual site. I ran back to town, intent on getting our car. I'd had the remaining sense, despite my panic, to grab the keys from Smith's pocket. But I did need something to calm my nerves. My hands shook violently. I knew I wasn't going to be able to drive, so I entered the town drugstore. I already knew the little old lady within. Her warm smile rang true against my surreal childhood memories. Her doddering husband worked the cash register while she picked out what I'd asked for, and I shuddered. In my dream, the old woman's skull had split open, and her brain had grown teeth, forming a fleshy maw big enough to crush and eat her terrified husband's face. He died gurgling and betrayed by his lifelong love, and then his corpse had begun turning itself inside out, growing 1,000 little spider-like limbs from the inner edges of his skin and muscles. The resulting corpse thing had chased my terrified child self down the main street relentlessly, and my only escape had been waking in a screaming sweat. I remember him saying this yesterday, syllable for syllable. "What are ye looking at?" He was asking out of kindness and confusion. He wasn't angry that I'd been staring at him while lost in memory. He was just worried about me, right up until the teeth slammed down and his face crumpled between brain matter jaws. Leaping back and knocking over product-filled shelves, I screamed in absolute terror. Who wouldn't? The old woman had become exactly what God! It was sickening. Not waiting for his corpse to animate, I ran, surrounded by blurry panic. The sky was beginning to bubble right over the town, even approaching a boil. It looked like a rapidly building normal storm, not yet blood like I'd dreamed, but I was no fool. There were screams echoing out up and down the street. Not the screams of the damned, but the screams of the living. Those unfortunate souls who hadn't yet turned, being slaughtered by their friends and loved ones. I wasn't changing. Why wasn't I changing? Had my presence at the ritual site protected me? Or was it the fact that these people had lived nearby the site their entire lives? Were they more susceptible somehow? On my desperate run back to the motel and to my car, I almost bowled over a startled old man who had been heading into town. His skin was mottled, and he was very frail. He gripped my arm with surprising strength, though, and screamed at me to be heard over the raging winds. He said, "What have you done, boy? I saw you. What did you do out in the woods? Did you disturb the stone ring?" My horrified stare was all the confirmation he needed. He said, "The ring is a barely cracked seal, and the plagued townsfolk are going to try to widen the crack, perhaps destroy the seal completely. I'm too old to do what must be done. You must either move whatever sacrifice you made and burn the corpse, or you must return to town and kill every single one of the monsters those people have become." I stared at Grayson, my mouth dropping a half-inch. Holy shit, had this guy gone on a killing spree? I mean, I would have too, if that had all really happened to me. "So the blood on your shirt? You killed all those people?" He looked at me as if I was a moron. Do I look like some spick enforcer? I've never fought a man in my life. Kill 40-odd horrible mutated monsters all by myself? No, that would never have worked. I see. So, he'd gone back and moved Smith's body. That explained the blood on his shirt. Did that mean that there was still a small town populated by mutated horrors out there? Or had closing the rift destroyed or dispelled them somehow? "All right, I've told you what happened," he said plainly. "Any ethical obligation I had is now satisfied. It's on you." Shivering with confusion, I gave some polite goodbye and walked out in a daze. The cop who had let me in nodded as he saw my face. "Guy's a real prick, huh?" "What do you mean?" I asked, knowing that he hadn't been told Grayson's story. "He was going over 100 down the highway in a car filled with drugs and hit some housewife's van," he said quietly, leading me back toward the front. "Killed 3 kids." Ah, I had thought, at first, other than shock. How shitty could one person be? He had children he'd walked out on, he was involved in crime, he was vaguely racist. At least he'd gone back and, wait, so he got blood on his shirt from the car accident? "Yeah," the cop replied. "What do you think it was?" I froze right at the front door to the station. Outside, torrential rains beat down on the glass. Among all his other faults, Grayson was also a coward. He hadn't gone back. He'd just walked away. He'd been warned by decades-old dreams. He'd been led to the place and time of a tremendous disaster, with knowledge of what was to come. And instead of becoming a hero, he'd screwed it all up and walked away. Was that the true nature of human beings then? How many scary stories had I heard in my lifetime, expecting with each tale that I would rise to the occasion if they ever happened to me. Here I was, also doing nothing about it. What was there to do except stare out the window? I had no proof. If I did, I might have been able to call for aid, or go there myself and try to, as Grayson had put it, kill 40-odd mutated monsters all by myself. The thought made me quaver, and I kept finding reasons not to go and check it out for myself. Was I a coward too? I didn't want to believe him, but there was such an odd feeling in the air. So much for rising to the occasion. I had no proof. The story of the century, my first big break, and possibly my last, would likely be believed by no one. There's nothing left to do now but post it online and hope. Hope that someone does something. Or hope that Grayson was lying. After that, I'll watch the uncommonly intense rain and pray to God that it doesn't turn red. Story: The Inexplicable Case of John Doe. I'm a coroner. I've only had one strange encounter in my career, but it still keeps me up at night. I don't get freaked out by much. I'm not a squeamish person, nor a superstitious one. You can't be in my line of work. but I can't explain John Doe. We don't get any murders in my city. Overall, we're a pretty quiet and safe community. It's rare that a full autopsy is required, and it's more likely to be requested for unexpected deaths, medical malpractice, that kind of thing, than it is for a suspected murder. We don't have a separate medical examiner's office. I'm just in the basement of the hospital, which frankly isn't much of a hospital. It's better equipped than a typical doctor's office, but there are outpatient centers that are bigger than us if you go to a big city. If you have a complicated illness, you drive a few hours to Cleveland. However, I'm our coroner. I certify all deaths in the city and perform all our autopsies. When an unknown body turned up in the woods, you better believe the cops were all over it. It was the only exciting thing to happen to them that week. Hell, maybe ever. Several more officers than were necessary came in with the paramedics looking for some answers on how he'd gotten there. I didn't know. He didn't have any defensive wounds. There was nothing in the initial exterior examination. Livor mortis and rigor mortis were present. I estimated the death at around 12 hours prior. The x-rays came back normal. There were no obvious signs of poisoning upon interior examination. Stomach contents were a half-digested tuna sandwich, and I think a Coke. His heart was enlarged, but not abnormally so. It was indicative of cardiomyopathy, but this is the United States of America. We're all fat and have heart disease. The one weird thing was that we had trouble getting prints. No matter how we took them, they just looked blurred. The police couldn't run them, but his fingertips didn't appear to be damaged in any way. To visual inspection, they appeared normal. Due to the lack of any other evidence, I would have guessed heart attack if I hadn't known the circumstances. But he was found a mile into the woods, stark naked, a few feet off the trail. The most likely cause, I felt, was poison. There weren't obvious signs, but sometimes there aren't, depending on what was used. He didn't have dirty feet, which meant he probably didn't strip naked and go for a run. He was likely placed there after death. I told the police as much. I packed his organs back into his chest cavity, his brain back in his skull, and put him away. I sent the samples to the lab for testing, but it takes a while, and the really comprehensive panels are expensive enough that the department didn't want to pay for them. I mean, you don't show up in the woods, naked, by yourself, in the middle of the night, and then die of natural causes, typically. He didn't show any obvious signs of a drug overdose. The police believed it was a homicide, but without any evidence, I ruled cause of death undetermined. We left it there. And that was the last I thought of it, until the lab called me to ask what the hell I had sent them. The lab results were inconclusive. They couldn't get any DNA from the samples at all. I went to get the body back out and take some more samples, maybe look at some new tissue slides under the microscope again, but he wasn't where I left him. I looked high and low, meaning in each cold locker, thinking I had mislabeled or misremembered where I put him, but he wasn't in any of them. It's not a large morgue. It's not like misplacing your keys. If I couldn't find the body, it was gone. I didn't like that at all. To be honest with you, I panicked. How do you lose a body? In all my years in the field, I had never heard of such a thing happening. I called up the chief of police and explained the situation. So the police added a report about the theft of human remains from government custody, which I'm sure if they ever caught the perpetrator would be a list of charges longer than my leg. The running theory was that someone stole the remains to cover up the murder. That didn't go over well, since it implied a member of the hospital staff was likely involved. But what can you do? The police weren't too serious about pursuing it. I don't think they seriously suspected anyone at the hospital. Without an ID, it was hard to investigate. It was a decent, scary story to talk about at parties, especially since the death had been well covered by the local papers. Everyone around here had heard about it. A few months went by, and honestly, I hardly thought about it anymore, though I was careful to lock the morgue when I left for the day. We were busy. We were having an unfortunate uptick in deaths, so I had gotten the okay to hire on an assistant. He was a sharp kid, he learned quickly. He had a few autopsies under his belt when another body turned up. John Doe, clothed this time, Hanes' white t-shirt and Levi's well-worn tennis shoes. Called in by a scared teen who found him in the dumpster behind the fast food joint where she worked. It was a different pair of cops who responded at the scene. Whole different team of people, EMTs, everybody. Which is why I guess I was the first to notice. "What the fuck?" I said when I saw his face. "What?" "This is the same guy," I said. "This is the same guy that went missing before." "A missing persons case? You recognize him?" "No, I mean the same guy, the remains that went missing a few months ago. How is this possible?" My assistant didn't have any idea, but I was highly agitated and probably not making a lot of sense. I called the police department. The two cops who brought him in, this time, weren't particularly helpful. They started speculating that it was a serial killer with a specific type. I called back and insisted they send some more senior guys down, the ones who picked up John Doe before. So Laurent and Bill came down to take a look. "Well, I'll be goddamned," Laurent said. "It's the same fucking guy." "Couldn't be," Bill said. "A twin, maybe?" "Maybe," I agreed grudgingly. "It must be. What are the odds?" "Well, could it be the same guy?" Laurent asked. "Hear me out. What if they took the remains and froze them?" I shook my head. "I performed an autopsy last time. This guy hasn't been cut open. You'd think if there was a pair of identical twins missing someone would have reported it," Bill said. "I can make a few calls. Let me know if anything comes back." One of the weird things about that body was that it was fresh. The police believed he had been in the dumpster a few hours at most, but he could have died elsewhere and been moved. And in fact, that seemed likely based on the activity at the restaurant. However, he had no signs of livor mortis, which, if you don't know, is discoloration of the skin due to blood pooling. It's obvious to visual inspection. The ambient temperature was quite warm, and counterintuitively, this typically accelerates the onset of rigor mortis, which you probably do know of. It begins in fine muscles of the face before affecting the hands, and then the rest of the larger muscles, making them stiff. It usually sets in about 2 hours to 8 hours post-mortem, and lasts for about a day altogether. You can estimate the time since death based on how it's affecting the muscles. John Doe had no signs of rigor mortis whatsoever, nor any of the markers that come after that. In short, he was dead, but didn't display some of the typical signs of being dead, and none of the ones that would help estimate time since death. He presented, honestly, like someone who had just died on the examination table moments before. If you're a decent coroner, you're the methodical type. I'm at least halfway decent, and wouldn't say I half-assed it the first time, but I was extremely meticulous this time, by the book. We opened him up, we examined every organ. We even cut into his limbs, which we don't normally do without specific reason. We took a lot more samples than we had the first time. His heart was strange. I weighed it, and it was enlarged. I was planning to do a couple of cross-sections to see if it was healthy, but when I pressed into it with the scalpel, a viscous white fluid oozed out. It had a smell that seeped through my mask. My assistant had to run and retch. I don't know if you've ever vomited into a face mask and shield, but it's messy. He was effectively down for the count. The smell was like walking into a Yankee Candle store, sort of. Not a bad smell per se, not like a severely decomposing body, but still strong enough to make you lightheaded. I've never seen or heard or smelled of anything like it. It was like the fluid had completely filled the atrial and ventral cavities. I would have said it was like his blood had been replaced, but when we vacuumed out his chest cavity, the blood had been normal. His arteries and veins were normal. It was only the heart. I guess that whatever happened must have been post-mortem, or else it would have been pumped through his arteries. But that didn't explain what had happened. I briefly debated the merits of dumping the fluid down the sink, and therefore eventually into the municipal water supply, but decided against it. I put on fresh gloves and took a careful sample, being sure to seal it. I then put the whole metal tray full of the substance into one of the triple-bagged 5-gallon buckets we had handy. I tied the bags off, closed the lid, and then bagged the bucket for good measure. We left the room. I locked the door behind me, and we went upstairs to give my assistant a chance to recuperate. The ventilation down there is very good, so we hoped it would dissipate the smell in the meantime. When we finally went back into the room, the smell had mostly disappeared, along with the body. So had the samples, the bucket with the substance in it, and even the camera we had been photographing him with. We called in the police again. They added a note to their report. If you're wondering about security footage, we had very few cameras. They were limited to the public entrances at the front and back of the building, and in the emergency room and main corridors on the first floor. There weren't any in the stairwells, which were on either side of the building, had emergency exit doors to the outside. Nor were there any cameras in the basement, which only held the morgue, some storage rooms, and some admin offices. I know it probably seems strange to some of you, but we're a drive-by town with no real crime, and this was years ago. Cameras weren't as ubiquitous as they are today. I heard the police complain to the mayor, but the state was also in the middle of a budget crisis at that time, so I assumed they didn't have the money to add more. So, when the body showed up the third time, about 6 months later, I was beside myself. A distressed citizen called in a report of a creepy man parked in a car just outside her family's home. When dispatch sent some police to investigate, it became obvious he was dead after they shot him. After a couple verbal warnings, the rookie officer panicked and fired. The bullet passed through his left shoulder. Word got around. The rookie was swearing up and down that he saw movement, which is clearly impossible because the man was dead. But, in fairness, most of what had occurred with this guy seemed impossible. His partner said there wasn't any movement. It was just a rookie who was trigger happy. That was the official report. But interestingly enough, off-duty and after a few beers, he confessed to Laurent, who passed it on to me, that something was not quite right about the body. He wouldn't say what. I am not sure if that's how he really felt, or if he was drunk and trying to placate Laurent, who was pissed that some white kid with a badge fired a shot at an unmoving, unresponsive person and got off with a slap on the wrist. The police didn't want word getting out about this disappearing, reappearing body. Neither did the mayor, as it wasn't good press for him. So he and the police department let our local reporters have a field day with the rookie, who ended up quitting the force and leaving town. He couldn't take the notoriety, so he left. I heard he started a landscaping business with his brother in Indiana. The third autopsy itself was mostly normal. Aside from the absence of the typical stages of death, liver and/or rigor mortis, putrefaction, which I don't mean to gloss over because it is very strange, incredibly strange. It's impossible, but so is doing an autopsy on the same person 3 times. Honestly, in that situation, it was almost weirder that it was normal. When you're expecting something to jump out at you, every minute it doesn't is agonizing. He still didn't seem right to me, but we didn't find any other abnormalities. I kept slicing into him and expecting something mind-numbingly weird to happen, but there were no mysterious fluids. Nothing mysterious at all. There was the obvious entry and exit wound of the bullet, but nothing else of note, which was both not strange enough and also still strange. There still weren't any obvious causes of death. He was by every measure a perfectly healthy human male. I wondered if I had entered some sort of purgatory for mediocre medical examiners. Maybe this body was punishment for missing something, and I was doomed to repeat it until I found the cause of death. I really was questioning my career and my life choices by this point. When I went home, I started talking with my wife about moving closer to her family like she's always wanted. I don't like her family, but a fresh start in a new town seemed like a good idea. We were careful that time about chain of custody. The police department sent us a detail to guard the body, which mainly consisted of a guy in the basement of the hospital to watch the lockers after we left for the night. We did our thing and put the guy into cold storage. We shipped the samples to the big lab upstate. But of course, it did have to get weird. Like with the previous bodies, no matter how carefully we took prints, the images always looked blurred when we tried to match them in the database. Same with his dental records. The DNA samples came back inconclusive. We sent them another sample. Same results. The police don't formally close investigations for at least a year, but we only have to hold unclaimed remains for 30 days. We kept some samples assuming there was going to be a protracted back and forth with the lab, but we sent him for cremation as soon as it was allowed. I wanted him out of my morgue. But you know the story by this point. A couple guys came to transport him first thing. I opened the locker to pull him out, and the body was missing. So we opened every cold locker in the storage room to make sure I hadn't misplaced him. This time we found him. I wish we hadn't. He was on top of someone else. They were lying together, like someone had placed them there in the mockery of a marriage bed. I cannot stress this enough. It was deeply disturbing. And I say this as someone who has seen some pretty gruesome deaths. First of all, the girl was underage. I mean, if you're going to pull a prank like this, I guess you could argue age doesn't really matter when you're talking about lifeless bodies. I don't know that that was the intent. But the image alone was bad. I can't forget how it looked. This middle-aged man with his arms wrapped around a blonde teenage girl. She looked like a child. She had overdosed. Not disfigured by an accident or anything like that. I don't think you could mistake her for a sleeping girl, but she looked peaceful enough. And this guy honestly did look like he was sleeping. He just didn't look dead to me. I don't know how to describe it. I've been in this line of work a long time, and I've never seen a body look like that. It looked like this grown man had crawled into bed to sleep with a dead little girl. Aside from the grotesqueness of the scene, it was a complicated pose. His arms were wrapped around her, so parts of him were under her, and parts of her were under him, if that makes sense. It would have taken significant manipulation of both bodies to get them into that position. It took me and my assistant both to get them separated. We didn't take pictures. It was probably protocol, it being a crime scene and all, but it didn't feel right. I didn't want evidence that her parents might see in some court case someday. I didn't pick up the camera and no one asked me to. Everyone was pretty rattled. The techs didn't like it. The on-duty cop didn't like it. He liked it even less when his shift commander personally drove down to the hospital to grill him and hospital security. Had he fallen asleep? Had he been skipping out? Had he left the body alone for any length of time? He swore up and down the only times he left were to take a leak, 2 minutes tops. He locked the door behind him. There was no one in the basement of the building when he usually took his bathroom break around 4 a.m. There was, of course, nothing on the cameras overnight, but as I mentioned, the emergency exit doors and the stairwells were not monitored, as they only opened from the inside. So we supposed it was in the barest realm of possibility that someone walked in the main entrance and hid out, or snuck in the side entrance one night, came downstairs to do their deed at 4 a.m., only to escape out a side door. It seemed improbable someone could move those bodies alone, and that quickly. Maybe the police officer was lying, and in on it, and even helped the perp. But that of course begs the question, to what end? For the cop, or this unknown person or people? What possible motive could there be for that? They didn't steal or destroy evidence this time. It was simply bizarre. The shift commander was frustrated, but the details didn't point to anything plausible. The police did a very thorough investigation. They swept the whole lab for prints. There was nothing unusual. All people who had been there and were supposed to have been there, and not that many prints besides, as most of the time people wear gloves. They didn't find anything on the CCTV tapes. None of the hospital staff remembered anything unusual in the past month. Anyway, the techs carted the guy off and they cremated him. There was some dithering about whether to continue to hold him in light of these new events, but I think everyone was just as eager to get rid of him as I was, so he left that morning to get cremated. I followed up with one of the guys who took him, and he swore he saw John Doe go into the chamber with his own eyes. I felt relieved. He hadn't disappeared this time. Whatever this bizarre tableau was, it was over. And yet, imagine my surprise when he showed up again, turned up like a bad penny. I didn't even ask the circumstances. I was afraid to. I'll spare you the details of the autopsy. There was nothing noteworthy. Again, no cause of death could be determined. He went into a locker. I sent the samples to the lab even though I knew it was futile. Can you guess what happened after? Yeah, we lost the body again. Only took a couple days. This time there were eyewitnesses, though what they saw frankly raises more questions than it answers. An admin saw a guy in misfitting clothes and a lab coat limping barefoot out of the lobby. She said she called out to him a few times, but he ignored her. She knew he didn't work in the building, and of course the bare feet were suspicious. She was worried he was having some kind of psychiatric episode, so she called security and the police. He went right out the back door. You can see him on the security footage of the rear parking lot, just the grainy, monochrome back of his head. John Doe shuffling away from the building. The worst part for me is the clothes he's wearing. They're mine. I kept a spare set downstairs. He went through my things and he took them before he walked off. The admin is in frame for a few seconds. She comes and stands outside, watching the man go. If you watch the tape all the way through, the cops get there, and she comes back out with security. They confer for a minute. She points them in the direction John Doe went, and they go after him. If you keep watching, a second set of cops pull up and go after the first two. And what wasn't caught on camera was the manhunt when the first two cops didn't come back. They stopped responding to their radios shortly after entering the woods near the property line, past the parking lot. The second set of officers couldn't find them. The next day they brought in some local huntsmen who are good trackers. Then they brought in dogs from a canine unit in another town. When both of those failed, the police enlisted able-bodied volunteers to completely scrub the whole area, square foot by square foot. The manhunt lasted about a week before they gave up hope. It was a major scandal. People were speculating all sorts of crazy things. An escaped asylum patient gone on a murderous rampage in the woods, what have you. The fact that he was a dead John Doe actually managed to get swept by the wayside. He was clearly alive in the security footage. Everyone wanted to know who he was. We never figured it out. The car he was found in the previous time was registered to an elderly man a few towns over who had died of natural causes, and the car had been reported stolen by his son, who was the executor of his estate. They denied knowing John Doe, and neither of them could be proven to have any association with him. Nor did they resemble him, so the car theft didn't seem like a personal or familial dispute. The trail was cold. I'm ashamed to say I didn't join the search to find the missing officers. To be honest with you, and I feel guilty about this, I hope they didn't find John Doe. Missing men be damned. I couldn't bear to do another autopsy on him, and resolved to quit on the spot if they found him. And lucky or unlucky, they didn't. They never found a trace of him, nor the police officers who followed him. No blood, no sign of a struggle, not even a footstep. It's been many years since then. I think he's gone for good. I don't know what John Doe wanted, but I guess he must have gotten it somehow. Or maybe he's haunting some other benighted ME's office somewhere. I'll tell you, while I like my job, and I always have, I've hated unzipping body bags since then. I'm always half afraid it will be John Doe in there, laughing at me. My retirement is coming up soon, and I'm looking forward to never having to wonder if I'll see him again. Story: I'm a homicide detective. My newest case is unlike anything I've seen before. Just for a little background, I worked on the police force as a street officer for over 10 years before I got the chance to work in homicide. Believe it or not, homicide detective is generally one of the most coveted jobs in the policing. Once I finally got my opportunity, I seized it and never looked back. I don't mean to brag, but I'm very good at what I do. I reached a status in the field of homicide investigations that I often get called out to other departments to assist them. It's a mostly thankless job, as people only remember the name of the killer and not the person who put them behind bars. But I don't desire a spotlight anyway. A little extra pay wouldn't hurt though. To be fair, very few murders that are committed are ever done by a serial killer, and it is typically who you would think it is. A jealous ex, a cheating spouse, a drug deal gone wrong, gang fights, and while suicides are obviously not a case of murder, they are also left to the homicide department. This is what my job mostly consists of. However, on rare occasions, I do get assigned to a serial killer case. My most recent case is, how should I put this, unique. I mean, every case is unique, of course. No two serial killers are exactly the same, but they all typically follow a sort of pattern. This was something that I had never seen before. It started out like any normal investigation. An on-duty officer received a call about suspicious noises next door, and the officer found an unresponsive woman inside. He requested backup and made sure the scene was secure. Then my crew of investigators was called to the scene. The homicide department responds to any death, including murder, suicide, accidents, and even natural deaths. So, I wasn't too surprised when I first arrived at the scene. She was lying on the kitchen floor, but there were no wounds or even bruises to be found on her. At least on the outside, there could be some type of internal damage, but once again, the coroner would have to update me on that. There had been no signs of forced entry to the house, and there were no signs of any type of struggle. She was fully clothed, with no rips or tears anywhere in her clothing. By all accounts, it appeared like a natural death of some sorts, which is somewhat of a broad category, but most common is a heart attack. However, something just seemed off to me. I had seen plenty of heart attack victims, and this just didn't seem right. If she had suffered a heart attack, or some other sort of internal trauma, then why was she lying perfectly face up on the floor? With no fall wounds, and the kitchen was as tidy as could be, nothing out of place. Clearly the neighbors had heard something to make the call to the police. It just didn't all add up. That's when I noticed it in the corner of the room, a video camera. Grab that camera, find out if the victim had a security system. It should help us to see what happened here, I said to one of my underlings. I looked over the body one more time and looked around the house, but it all just seemed too normal to me. I would have to wait for the coroner's report and to see what was on that camera. Luckily, it didn't take too long to find the contents of the camera, but it only fueled my suspicion even more. It turns out the woman did have a security system. It made sense since she lived alone. However, it seemed quite convenient that the cameras shut off briefly before the victim's estimated time of death. From the last footage on the camera, as well as another camera in her living room, we can see the victim entering her home and going to the kitchen. It appeared as if she was going to open a cabinet when the footage stopped. No cabinets had been opened when we arrived at the scene, and her body was lying on the opposite side of the kitchen, nowhere near where the cameras had cut off. It still made zero sense to me. Then came the coroner's report. Heart attack? I asked mockingly. Heart attack, the coroner said in a somewhat dissatisfied tone. Was there any sort of trauma from a potential fall? Nope, I checked everything. She appeared in good shape. Was there no other abnormalities? These things happen sometimes, detective. You just have to accept it. I couldn't accept it though. It didn't feel right. I wouldn't be able to continue the investigation as things stood though. There was absolutely zero evidence of foul play, and I knew the department wouldn't allow me to continue an investigation as such. It would take at least one more, if not several more of these oddities to pop up for them to set me loose, but I just knew that this wasn't the end. However, for the time being, I did have to move on. Serial killers have a cooling off period, so I would have to wait for new evidence to appear, or another death to occur. Until then, I would have other work to do, and more crimes to solve. A few weeks went by, and while I hadn't forgotten about the odd case, it had been pushed to the back of my mind. I couldn't afford to have my mind clouded while I still had other deaths to figure out. Everything had gone back to as normal as it could get in my line of work, when my deputy detective Alex plopped an envelope on my desk. "What's this?" I asked her. "I don't know. Someone from the tech crew gave it to me and told me it was evidence from one of your cases. They said they already made copies," she said, then shrugged. I opened the envelope to find a USB device inside. Even if it had been tested by our tech crew, I always err on the side of caution. We have a computer in our office, specifically for viewing this type of evidence. That way, if there was some sort of deeply encrypted virus, we wouldn't risk infecting our computers filled with classified information. I wasn't sure what I was dealing with at the time. I tend to work multiple cases at once, so this could have been a variety of things. Alex had been vague, but she was one of the few people I could normally rely on, so I opened the file on the USB. It was a video file, and just from the preview I knew exactly what it was. It was the missing footage from the mysterious heart attack case. My attention became entirely focused on the video. It started where the last footage had left off. The victim opened up one of her cabinets and grabbed a cup. She opened her refrigerator and pulled out what seemed to be some sort of juice container. It was at this moment that from the second camera I could see someone entering her front door. The person was medium-sized with a male figure, and he was wearing a typical burglar-style mask. He had begun to slowly walk towards the kitchen, one sinister step at a time. Meanwhile, the victim had begun to drink her juice. As the intruder reached the doorway of the kitchen, the victim had begun to wobble on her feet. Something was wrong with her. Then it seemed as she passed out and began to fall to the floor. She didn't hit the floor though. The masked man caught her. He then laid her down gently in the exact spot that we found her. After lying her down, the man stood up and stared directly into the camera. Unfortunately, it was black and white footage, so I couldn't tell his eye color. I'm sure if I saw those cold eyes in person, I would recognize them though. I've looked into the eyes of serial killers before, and this was something more terrifying than I had ever seen. As the staring contest continued, I began to wonder if what I was looking at was even human. The footage was weeks old, but it seemed as if the man was looking directly at me, like one of those paintings where the eyes follow you, no matter how you move. That's when the footage ended, and not only did it end, it began to delete itself. I was still in somewhat a state of shock from what I had seen to really comprehend what was happening. Before I knew it, the footage was gone. The copies were of course a lie. What I had seen was the only footage of what had happened, and it was gone. No evidence remained. I must have grilled Alex for an hour on what she told me before I let up. She was usually dependable, but this sort of thing never happens, so perhaps she had become complacent when accepting the evidence. The person who had given her the envelope was someone we were familiar with, but the person who they obtained it from was not. We had to follow a long line of people to find out that we knew nothing about who had delivered the USB. It was frustrating to know we had lost valuable evidence, and I was the only person who had seen it. It was obviously planned out this way. The perpetrator clearly wanted me to see that footage, and only me. It is common for serial killers to toy with the police, and I knew now that I was about to enter a dangerous game. I knew I was clearly at a disadvantage because I had no clue what I was up against, but I'm sure he knew everything about me. On top of everything, I attempted to call the coroner who had told me there were no abnormalities in the victim. That had said the toxicology report was clean, but I knew there had to be something in what the victim had drank. Of course, the same coroner who had performed the autopsy hadn't shown up to work since that day he lied to me, which told me one of three things. 1. He was the killer. 2. He was a pawn of the killer and had run away. 3. The killer had used him and killed him. I found it unlikely that there were any other options. The first seemed the least likely, since I had confirmed the man had performed plenty of autopsies in the past and didn't fit the typical profile of a serial killer. Plus, I was certain his eyes were not the ones I had seen. I was leaning towards him being dead already. Despite everything, I still had nothing. Other than a brief stare down, there was no physical evidence. I returned home that night more frustrated than I had ever been. When I opened my door, I found something I hadn't been expecting. It was a letter, and yes, it was from my new suspect. Here is what it read. Hello, detective. Having a good day? Mine has been wonderful. I hope you enjoyed my gift. I've had my eye on you for quite some time. You always find your man, but can you find me? I doubt it, but I do hope you give it your best shot. You will have to make a very important choice soon, one that has no true right or wrong answer, but I won't spoil the surprise. The fun has just begun. I hate to admit it, but reading the letter gave me a small adrenaline rush. I had no clue what the future would hold, and I was at a complete and utter disadvantage. The killer knew who I was, where I lived, and who knows what else. I knew by his words he would kill again soon, and there was nothing I could do yet. The fun had truly just begun. Story. I'm a homicide detective, and I'm being toyed with. I had become the mouse in a game of cat and mouse. As a detective, I would normally be the one in the role of chasing after someone, but not anymore. I had become the center of someone's sick and twisted game. It often happens that a killer will toy with the police, taunting them of what they got away with, at least for the time being. However, most serial killers have their preference in victims and will do whatever is necessary to avoid getting caught, which is why you don't see serial killers target cops as victims. Not only does it bring the risk of someone being armed, but it will bring more attention to the crime. It sounds fucked up, and it is, but if a police officer dies, the entire force will be on high alert until the culprit is found. Whereas, if a prostitute is found dead, it's just another day at the office. Personally, I put the same amount of emphasis on solving murders regardless of the victim. But not everyone is me, and clearly the man after me is not the typical killer. A strange letter had been delivered to my door. Could I guarantee it was from a killer? No, but I would place everything I owned on it being so. I had run tests on the letter, And of course, there were no fingerprints or any other DNA left behind on it. It was typed out too, so there would be no way of matching handwriting. The letter had also been very vague, and not necessarily threatening from the outside. However, I could see its deeper meaning. Something was about to go down, and I would be in the middle of it all. Until something did happen though, I would go about my life as normal. Even though the killer knew where I lived, I would not move. If he wanted me dead, I would most likely have already been dead. No, he wanted to have some fun with me. Even if I did jump from hotel to hotel, he was most likely stalking me and would find me wherever I went. I would have to play his game until he slipped up or gave me anything to work with. Several weeks went by with no new developments or any contact with the killer. Until late one night when I was woken up by my work phone. Murder waits for no one, and even when I'm off the clock, I'm on the clock. If a body is found, it is my job to get there as soon as possible. I was given an address and told the scene had been secured. However, when I arrived to the address, I noticed there were no other police vehicles in the vicinity. This was a major red flag. On top of this, my work vehicle was currently getting maintenance, so I didn't have access to a police radio to ask what was going on. I still had my phone though, so I could just call the station and ask. Except I conveniently had no signal. I understand that at this point I should have driven away from the scene, contacted backup, and asked what was going on. This should have been the only decision I made, as it was the only logical one to make. Yet, it was not what I did. Instead, I grabbed my pistol and approached the home of the address. There were no lights I could see on inside the home from the outside. It was a modern-looking two-story home. No cars were parked in front. When I reached the front door, I could see it was slightly ajar. I readied my gun and slowly pushed my way inside. It was pitch black inside, so I immediately searched for the light switch. I gained no benefit from creeping around in the dark. I wouldn't give an added advantage to anyone already hiding. With the lights on, I could see that the house was empty. No furniture, nothing. Well, at least the base floor was empty. As I made my way up to the second floor, I could see entrances to 3 rooms. 2 were open, and like the rest of the home, were empty. The final door, however, was closed. Before entering, I checked my phone. I had signal again. I instantly texted someone I knew was working. I told them the address and to have backup sent just in case. I was facing a double-edged sword. I could wait for my backup to arrive before proceeding, ensuring my safety. However, if there was someone on the other side of that room that needed my help, then I could be running out of time. Once again, I chose the latter option. I made my presence known before kicking down the door. When I received no response, I proceeded inside the room. I wasn't exactly expecting what I found inside. From the moment I kicked in the door, I could see someone tied to a chair inside. I could tell they were still breathing, but they seemed to be unconscious. I slowly inched forward into the room. After making sure there was no one in any of the corners, I went to the closet door in the room. I readied my gun once more and swung it open. There was no one inside the closet. There was a gift-wrapped box inside though. At this point, I should have made sure the person in the chair was okay, but instead I felt an urge to open the box. Inside the box was a syringe filled with a clear liquid. Next to it was a small note that read, "Give her the medicine or I will kill 2 more." I turned back to the woman in the chair. She was still unconscious. I didn't recognize her. She was just a stranger. She could have been anyone off the streets. I know how serial killers think, and I knew he wasn't lying to me. He was watching me right now. If I didn't inject whatever was in this syringe into her, then he would keep his word in killing 2 more people. I thought back to the first body, the woman who had died of a mysterious heart attack. Was this the substance that caused it? For a split second, I considered injecting it into the girl. That was it though. It only took a split second for me to realize I couldn't do that. Whether or not I did what he wanted, he would continue to kill. I may be the mouse, but I wouldn't be a puppet. I set the box on the floor and immediately began untying the girl from the chair. I once again checked to make sure her vitals were okay, and she seemed to be fine. It wasn't long before my backup arrived, and we were able to have the girl safely transported to the emergency room. She suffered no major injuries and would recover just fine. After explaining what happened, I had my team check every inch of the home for prints or any sort of evidence. I also made sure the syringe was transported to a reliable source that could test the liquid as soon as possible. Of course, we couldn't find any further evidence. This guy was beyond good at covering his tracks. All I could hope was that the liquid inside the syringe could help us make any sort of advancement in the case. However, that was the most infuriating part. It didn't take long at all for the lab to tell me what the needle held: sugar water. The girl would have been fine no matter what decision I made. He just wanted to see what my reaction would be to his sick proposition. He wanted to see me squirm. If I had injected her, perhaps I could have saved 2 people, but since I hadn't, he would now use that as justification to kill 2 more. He probably knew that I would never have done what he asked, but he wanted me to have mental anguish and regret over my decision, to sow the seeds of doubt in my head. I wouldn't let him get to me though. No matter my decision, he would continue to kill until he was behind bars or rotting in the earth. Indeed, the killer kept true to his word. Several days after saving the girl, I was called to a new scene, this time by actual law enforcement. Inside this home, the bodies of 1 male and 1 female were found. They were found together in the master bedroom, holding hands in the bed. Those 2 hands were the only parts of the bodies that were not extremely mutilated. I have seen my fair share of gruesome crime scenes, but this was near the top. Many of my colleagues had to take breaks from the room, and I didn't blame them. There was also a message written in blood on the wall. As promised, it mocked me. After this, I was granted permission to invest my full focus into finding this psychopath. Against my wishes, the chief said he would also be calling the FBI and asking for them to send people to assist me. Everyone always thinks the FBI is the solution to crimes like these, but often it is local detectives that do most of the work. They would most likely hamper me more than aid me, but the final decision wasn't mine. This was all new for me. Once again, no useful evidence had been left behind. I was hoping with as much blood had been in the room, we would at least find a partial footprint, but no. I would have to think outside the box to catch this person. I was the center of their game, and I had to find a way to use that against them. There had to be a way. Until they made their next move though, all I could do was wait. Story: I'm a homicide detective, and I will be the next victim. Over the past several months, I have been wrapped up in a game with a serial killer, although it was more of a blowout and not in my favor. He had thoroughly outdone me, and I still had little to nothing to show for it. I knew the tides had to turn soon, because if they didn't, bodies would begin to pile up. I already knew more people were bound to die, and I couldn't stop it. In my line of work, you have to know you can't save everyone, but I have to try to save as many as possible. I knew I was most likely being watched at almost every turn. I had to be extra cautious when I was around any sort of technology. Even though I know it was impossible for him to hack everything, I had to assume that he could. I had to be creative in sending messages and relaying information to others. I still had no true counterattack, but I did put out a few pieces of bait in attempts to get any sort of a lead. These were long cons with a very small chance of success, but I had to try something. I had no way to track the killer, nor to even predict who he would kill next. While most killers have a preference, this person did not. Well, I suppose I may be his preference, but I would be his dessert, his final victim, until he could find another like me and play his game all over again. I didn't have any direct leads, but I did have one idea. Many killers have a tendency to go back to the scene of their crimes, typically to relive their twisted fantasies. So, I decided to visit the home of the first victim, well, at least the first I knew about. The home had been cleared out since the previous resident had suffered a heart attack. I was granted permission by the landlord to look through the home once again. My team and I had done a thorough job of checking the place out already, so I knew if I found any evidence it would be from a return visit from the killer. I knew this too was a long shot, but until the killer made his next move, I had nothing else to focus on. So, I entered the home. I opened every door and cabinet, looked in every corner, and I found nothing. It was possible the killer had returned to the scene, but he hadn't left anything for me to find. Instead, I decided to leave something for him. I pulled out a small envelope and placed it in the exact spot he had laid down the first victim. What has inside the envelope? Only a simple piece of paper with 2 words on it: "You lose." Less than an hour after I left the home, my police radio went off. There was a new crime scene. It was a single body this time, an older male. Similar to the first crime, and completely opposite from the second, there appeared to be no outward damage to the body. I could tell the man had been dead for at least a day, perhaps longer. Due to the age of the man, this could have easily been considered a natural death, if not for the way he had been posed. The man was lying down on the floor face up. With his right hand he held up 4 fingers. He was the 4th victim. His left hand was covering his mouth in a fashion that one would do to stifle a giggle. Other than this blatant mockery, there was no other evidence left at the scene. However, this would be the last time he would leave no evidence. My radio went off again, but this time with good news. "Report back to base," the voice at the other end said. Now this would seem to most as a simple thing to say and to follow, but it wasn't. I had to assume the killer had access to my radio signals, so this was the secret code I had made up. As far as anyone knew, I had gone to the first crime scene alone. Even the chief of police believed I had gone alone, but I hadn't. Days before I went, I had managed to get a secret message to an undercover cop, and they had been watching the home for over 48 hours, taking only minimal time to sleep and eat, and it had paid off. I had a hunch he wouldn't be able to resist seeing what I had left for him, and he assumed that if my attention, as well as the rest of my team's, was focused on a body at the other end of town, then he could slip in and retrieve what I had left. Now, we had eyes. One, someone taking that bait. Of course, this simply could have been another puppet of the killer, though. I had already instructed the undercover agent to simply follow the man. Once the man had reached his base of operations, then we would move in. Until then, I had to wait. It worked. I later was informed by the undercover agent that the killer had taken extremely complicated routes and was almost impossible to follow, but not quite impossible. As the agent was also quite good at what he did, and he was able to do it without getting discovered. Once the killer pulled into a large building, the agent sent out the second secret code for us to surround his location. We were able to completely surround the building before the person inside had a chance to know what was going on. He had nowhere to run now, or so we thought. As police flooded in through every entrance, they found no one inside the building. His car was inside, stolen of course, as well as many other things, but he was not. We soon discovered a tunnel that was under the building. It stretched far out into a nearby forested area, where the killer had most likely left some sort of off-road vehicle. He may have gotten away, but he was no longer in control. He had never intended for us to find his base, but he was smart enough to always have an escape just in case. We found photos of all the victims to this point, as well as many photos of myself. We found fingerprints. Of course, they didn't match any in our system, but it was something that could prove beneficial in the future. We would be able to inform officers to fingerprint on any traffic stop, at least until we got a match. One small slip-up, and he would be ours. As we all know though, some animals are most dangerous when they are backed into a corner. I knew sooner or later he would still come for me. Even if it meant getting caught, he wanted to best me. Ultimate victory would only come to him after he had claimed my life. However, I wasn't his next victim quite yet. After our discovery of his base, the killer went into a full-on rampage. He killed 5 people throughout the next week. These were unlike his previous crime scenes. They were messy, with evidence left in bundles. All of these 5 murders were done with a large blade, likely the same one that claimed victims 2 and 3. He had stopped maintaining the blade, however, as by the 5th victim in his spree, it was obvious the blade had become duller, and much more force had been put into the swings in order to finish off the victims. He left fingerprints, shoe prints, and from the impact and trajectory of the wounds on the victims, we were able to estimate a height and weight range. It was unfortunate we were unable to stop his spree at the moment, but were getting much closer. While the killer was now likely operating out of rage, it was clear he still kept some of his intelligence. It was likely these victims were already the ones he had planned out for the future, and we had simply expedited his process. He knew their schedules, and was still able to catch them off guard. being able to escape before police could arrive. At the scene of the 5th victim of his spree, his 9th overall kill, he left me a message in blood once more. And then there were 2. I was always to be his 10th victim. He had planned to toy with me more, but I had ruined that for him. In his mind, he could still win if he were able to kill me. I couldn't win this game. 9 people had died on my watch. I could never feel victorious knowing that. All I could do is stop him from killing anyone else. If it took my death to finally end this all, then that's all that mattered. Ironically, most killers get caught by doing something completely unrelated to the killing itself. So, I could have surrounded myself with armed police at all times and waited for him to slip up, but I knew he would kill more if I did this, just to send a message. No, I knew what I had to do. I had to face this monster alone. I knew exactly where he wanted me to go as well. It was time for the final showdown. Story: I am a serial killer. One of my victims wasn't human. Red River Ripper strikes again. 10 more bodies wash ashore. It was a curious headline to read since I was quite sure I hadn't killed anyone that week, let alone 10 people. The nerve of some people, acting as though I'm some sort of inhuman monster. Number. I am nothing if not careful, and killing 10 people all at once was which begged the question, who or what had killed them? Thankfully, I was in the position to find out. Linnell was a frightfully small town, tucked away into a forgotten corner of the American outback. It was a timid little place that was maybe 5 years away from total collapse. Already the cracks could be seen, starting with its absolutely pathetic police force. There were maybe 5 officers in total, and none of them knew what to do in the event of a homicide. So they turned to the next best thing, a doctor, specifically me. Being the sole medical profession in Lionel, I alone had the knowledge to aid in the investigation. It was what made killing there so easy. So imagine the irony when there came crime was actually entailed to solve. As stated above, the bodies were all found washed up upon the river shore. Strangest thing was they were all found on the same shore. I assumed the killer had thrown the bodies into the river to hide the evidence. If that were the case, it had been impossible for them all to wind up in the same location like they did. They also didn't suffer from the bloating and decomposition associated with waterlogged corpses. Someone was trying to make these bodies look like my handiwork. Or, judging from the wounds, something. I am no mere killer, dear reader. A killer would chase someone down with a meat hook and mangle the body like a child with their toys. I, on the other hand, take good care of my victims. I start at the neck, delivering a single decisive cut before they can regain consciousness. I also keep them suspended by their feet, so the blood doesn't stain their body. When all their veins have dried up, I clean the skin with formaldehyde, let it dry for 6 minutes, no more, no less. After that, I apply a moisturizing cream to all relevant body parts. Their bodies are speckless and pristine by the time they're ready to be chopped. Those 10, however, were mutilated as if by a common dog. The skin and meat was splashed open, the edges of every wound jagged and unkempt, and the bones were splintered as handled by the world's worst gardener. There was no respect for the bodies. None. It was despicable. It had to be an animal. I lied to the officers. No human would go through the trouble of desecrating the bodies in this way. There was some truth in that, but their condition had not been deliberate. Some scoundrel had figured himself the next Jack the Ripper and started slashing up the bodies with a semblance of thought or skill. As if that wasn't disgraceful enough, they had the gall to try and pass this sloppy work as my own. I was furious when the news spread. In a single day, almost 5 years of careful cultivation had gone up in flames. My name meant nothing. The fear it incited was a boorish sort that even a child could conjure. No longer was I the eye in the shadows you told yourself wasn't real. I was an animal that needed to be put down. Something had to be done, and being so close to the police gave me just the opportunity. Their investigation was as mismanaged and juvenile as always, but what clues it did unearth proved invaluable. All of the bodies had been last seen in the same location, the old hunting grounds up by the lumber mill. According to their remaining friends, the trip was a collective decision in order to celebrate one of their own recently getting engaged. The hunting lodge has them checking in at 3:07 in the afternoon. 16 hours later, a hiker happened upon them, faces bloated with river water. It was as good as any place to start. Of course, I had to be somewhat more discreet in my inspection than the police, an act I was more than prepared for. When I recognized my passion for the homicidal arts, the first thing I did was shave my head and face of all hair. It was easier to paint a new portrait with a blank canvas. All it took was a wig, fake eyebrows, color contacts, and a surgical application of makeup. The lodge attendants had no idea it was me. No one ever did. There wasn't much to find in the hunting grounds, though. It was, after all, a forest. There were no shreds of fabric, no missing guns, not even a body part. Even the section that ran by the river was devoid of evidence. With the mess that had been made of the bodies, there should have been some trace of a struggle. If there was, the forest would not forfeit it. However, in the end, it did not need to. I found my first lead upon returning to the lodge after a long, fruitless day of scouring the forest. Passing through the main lobby, I overheard a peculiar conversation. Get this. The creep wasn't even wearing any neon or whatever. I almost thought he was a deer, what with all that skulking. My ears perked up at that, and I lingered near the hunters. Should have just shot the guy and spared the world an idiot, the other said. I almost did. But the fucker scampered off like a fucking rat or something. Couldn't exactly shoot straight with how dark it was. I couldn't even see my fucking gun. The two hunters enjoyed a hearty laugh, whilst I was left to ponder what I had heard. For those who don't know, it's common practice for hunters to wear bright clothing as opposed to camouflage. It prevents other hunters from mistaking them for animals and the like. If what I'd heard was true, then someone had been skulking around the grounds at night whilst wearing dark clothing. There was no better suspect. My nighttime proclivities had left me well prepared to capture the mystery man. The first step was making my way onto the hunting grounds undetected. I couldn't go through the front door, even whilst disguised. A careful enough eye could spy details even makeup couldn't hide. I dressed for the occasion, wearing nothing but black, and snuck my way inside. The forest was an eerie place to be at night, not for the long shadows cast under a plump full moon nor the chill that slithered through the air. It was the sounds that came creeping from every unseen corner. I hated being in the middle of it. The snapping twigs, the whistling branches, the alien calls of animals skulking in the undergrowth. It gave one the impression that at any moment, something would leap from and drag you back into the shadows. I hate that sensation of being at the mercy of some figure in the dark. It gnaws at the corners of the mind, robbing me of any peace of mind. In my younger years, it followed me wherever I went. It was in my closet, under my bed, and down the hall, fucking my mother. I feared such an itch would drive me mad. As I grew older, however, I found a solution. Why fear something in the dark when that something is you? That all changed in the forest. Once again, I was caught in the dark with all manner of monsters staring at me, as if I needed another reason to despise that cretinous amateur. The hunt was easier than any before it. In the forest, there were no prying eyes or passing witnesses. I only needed to worry about the hunters, but barely. They were far too focused on their own prey. Resisting the urge to drag them away was difficult. If only the temptation had been greater than my rage. I needed them, after all. The trick to hunting a predator is not to track them, but rather their prey. I knew they couldn't resist for long. Sure enough, when the hour was at its latest, I spied someone moving through the undergrowth. I had been lingering near one of the hunters and spotted something approaching them. It started as a mere shade slinking through the underbrush and gradually evolved into a figure clad in black. They were remarkably skillful at stalking. Had I not expected them, I might not have spied their approach. Seeing them for the first time, I noticed something odd about the figure. It took me a while before I realized what exactly put me on edge. The figure made no sound. Not a little sound. None. Every shrub they brushed past and twig they stepped on were as quiet as corpses. It was as if someone had muted the figure. Had I not seen them with my own eyes, I'd never have thought anyone was there. How were they doing that? I remember thinking as my hands crushed into fists. They were just an amateur. I'd ought to rip open their throat and hang them by their veins. And just when they were about to croak out their last pathetic breath, I'd cut them down and calm down. Be professional. As talented as the figure was, they seemed to have trouble watching their back. I crept towards them with unrivaled skill and drew a syringe from my coat. In the past, I had strangled or even taken to knocking my prey unconscious. When such methods proved too messy or slow, I turned to chemical alternatives. I crept through the undergrowth until I was right behind the figure and then, in one swift motion, stabbed the needle into their back. It was a routine I'd practiced many times over, and like then, it did not fail me. The figure started to wobble before they could give any sign of alarm and collapse without even a whimper. I caught them before they could fall and slung them over my shoulder. We were far enough away from the hunter that my actions, subtle as they were, remained undetected. The amateur was mine. A grin grew across my face as I rushed back through the woods. It had been some time since I'd been so excited for a kill. The mere thought of them tied up in my workshop almost made me squeal with glee. With how impatient I was, it is amazing I returned to my car without being caught. I zipped, tied the figure's wrists and ankles before shoving them in the back and driving away, breaking every speeding law known to man. I drove not towards the town, but deeper into the woods. I had learned through a great deal of trial and error that it is better to keep one's workshop far, far away. First, it was a storage container that some nosy attendant looked inside. Then it was an old cabin a teenager broke into. Finally, I bought an old camping trailer from a stranger online and parked it out in the middle of nowhere. The inside was then covered in a fine layer of plastic wrap before I moved in my tools. They hung from every wall, rows and rows of blades from delicate scalpels to meat cleavers. They were laid flat against the wrapping, the cold metal complementing the lifeless plastic. You never knew what each victim would require, so it was best to come prepared. It was there, my shrine of steel, that I drove the amateur to, and here I would begin my work. I abandoned all pretenses of professionality once I stepped inside. The amateur was not to be my victim. They were meant only to suffer. I tied them to a chair and ripped off their morbid attire, piece by tattered piece. Beneath was a hairless, detailed face quite similar to my own. It was hard to tell if they were supposed to be a man or a woman, but it would not matter. The sedative would wear off soon, after all, and then I could start having some fun. It had been a while since I let myself indulge in my more unpolished impulses. I couldn't decide where to start. Perhaps I'd peel their skin or cut off an arm and feed it to them. Maybe I'd mangle their face and hang them in the town square, a dire message to those who dared insult me. Yes, I thought to myself as I drew a blade from my workbench, my smile caught in the reflection. That would do just nicely. My wait was short-lived. Mere minutes after gathering my tools, the stranger began to stir. I had never regressed so much in a single instant. All at once, I was a child again, skinning stray cats with a butter knife. What fun times. I turned to face my plaything just as their eyes opened. I'm almost disappointed. I began. It was no trouble at all finding you. Were you even trying to hide? Did you think I would not find you? It wouldn't be the greatest insult you've made. I stepped forward and placed the knife edge up under their chin. Do you know who I am? It was another second before they fully returned to consciousness. My heart thundered in excitement. First would come the screaming, then the struggling, and finally, the begging. Sweet, succulent pleas for me to leave unabated. I held my breath and waited. A minute passed and I still waited, and then a second, a third, fourth. I said, "Do you know who I am?" I spat at the amateur, digging the knife deeper into their jaw, but my demand fell on deaf ears. The figure stared at me not with fear or alarm, but the wide, curious eyes of a child. My excitement turned to anger under that gaze, and I dragged my dagger across their chin. A little motivation to help them play along. Yet they still did not scream. There was not one sign of pain anywhere on their person, even as blood trickled down their chin. My anger turned to confusion, and then to fear. What was happening? They hadn't even flinched. The bastards had to be mocking me. They were in pain, any person would be, but they refused to let me enjoy it. That pompous bastard. Anger burned through my veins like hot oil. I gripped the knife so hard my hand trembled and clenched my teeth until they felt as though they would shatter. I raised my dagger high over my head and brought it straight down on the amateur's hand. It was only then that the figure reacted. They opened their mouth as if to scream, but what emerged was far worse. Their lips peeled back and didn't stop at their cheeks. Their mouth stretched further than should have been possible, cutting up into the rest of their head until it looked as though it would be cut in two. What was under that hellish grin wasn't flesh or bone left naked as the skin peeled away, but a face, my face, to be specific. I stumbled back at the sight of me. I touched my own face as if to check it was still there. The one I stared into was more just a replica, however. It was a copy more perfect than my own, and behind it, those barren eyes staring out, the sight overloaded my mind in a single instant. All at once, I was a child again, waiting for the thing in the dark to come find me. "Give it back," I remember saying. "That's mine, my face. Give it back." I raised my danger once again, only for the figure to open their mouth again. Their head peeled back, and this time, revealed my face from before my alterations. The bright hair, the chaotic arrangement freckles, even that mole I'd cut off were all present. Every detail I hated stared back at me while the eyes remained as simple as ever. I wanted to bring the knife down. I thought with all my might, trying to command my hand to rise, but I couldn't. It was my face. Before it, I was just the frail man who'd been trapped behind it. It was the figure itself that finally freed me. He opened his maw again, and this time, revealed a face I did not recognize. This was followed by another, and another, and another. Faster and faster the mouths opened, until not even faces were revealed anymore. There were only rows upon rows of teeth stacked atop each other, and perpetually pulling back. By the time I noticed one pulling back, 15 others had emerged from the maws and raced away. There wasn't even a mouth anymore, but mouths within mouths, like a twisted nesting doll. It was maddening to witness. My eyes tried and failed to follow the pattern, only to sting from the effort. My civility melted away in the face of such impossibility, and was replaced with a single-minded drive: survive. Without thought, I ripped the dagger out of that redundant beast's hand, with the intent of stabbing something more vital. However, the entire arm divided in two, so whilst there was indeed a limb tied to the chair, another was caught on the blade and dragged out of the first. Another arm divided from the side of the one my blade was embedded in, and then lashed back to said knife. The hand wrapped around my wrist and began splitting, hands sliding out from each like cards from a deck until a net of fingers had spread over my arm. I was trapped with that thing mere inches away, folding and unfolding. I could not comprehend what I was seeing. Arms unfolded from arms in a swirling cascade of fractal limbs. Body parts split only to rejoin, twisting themselves into impossible shapes. 3 arms sprung from the shoulder only to fuse at the wrist, leaving a single hand to be shared between them. 5 other limbs wrapped around each, in a helix that ended in a flower of hands and fingers. It was a redundant monstrosity, with too many limbs and not enough space. An impossible nightmare that would no longer stay in the dark. It pulled me close, its endless grip wrapped tight around my arm, but I refused to be this demon's victim. My free hand fished through air until my fingers grazed one of many blades still hanging from the walls. Whichever knife it was, I quickly brought it down on the arms, holding me, and cleaved through meat and bone in one swift chop. Newly freed, I leapt away from the living paradox. Already its endlessly unwinding figure had filled the space in my RV, blocking the door with a tangle of body parts. There was still, however, one way out. In the back of the trailer, where the creature had trapped me, there was a larger window that was easy enough to break. Using the knives, I shattered the glass and scurried out into the forest. I planned to rush to my car, but the creature had the exact same though. Limbs exploded out of the side of the trailer and stabbed into the vehicle like arrows. They took deep swipes, ripping the car apart piece by piece until it was no more than a pile or scrap. The hands retracted and pulled the rest of the monstrosity out into the open, letting it unfurl to its true shape. It never seemed to settle. There was always something more to unpack, always a new limb to unveil. It rose to tower over the trees with a forest or shadows cast from it. Atop the web of limbs rested a head made of mouth, and upon each tooth rested an eye. Eyes that, one by one, turned to look at me. I'd never felt so small in my adult life. With the knife in my hand, I thought of cutting the creature apart. But this insanity was short-lived. I couldn't deny what that creature was, nor how powerless I was in the face of it. There was only one course of action left. I ran back into the woods like a fucking mongrel with its tail tucked between its legs. Pathetic. The creature had no intention of letting me flee so easily. It surged forth in a cascade of hands and feet, weaving through the trees like a swarm of insects. Despite its unorthodox physique, the creature was quite nimble. Its body was liquid, I believe, in that it seemed to morph to fit between the trees. The sight was quite entrancing, if I do say so, whenever I had the time to sneak a peek, but it was impossible to forget the danger it posed. I saw it was nimble, but not enough to catch me. Its body battered against the trees with every step and broke off a number of branches. If I could be so bold as to speculate on such an alien creature, I do not believe it was comfortable with changing its shape. Compacting such a mass must have been more difficult than unpacking it. Wherever shrinking was required, it was slowed just enough for me to keep my distance. Though what little advantage this gave me could not last. I wove and ducked around as many trees as I could, trying to slow the beast down, but the chase was stretching on for too long. My lungs slowly began to boil in my ribs, staining every breath with a tortuous dryness. Muscles ignited all throughout me, most so in my legs, who felt as though they were trying to kill themselves. Already my pace had slowed, and the forest's unforgiving terrain offered no respite. I needed a plan, but how could I hope to best such a creature? The short answer was, I could not. As much as I longed to feel its flesh beneath my blade, it would always be my better. This meant the only option was to escape. But how? The answer came to me when the forest suddenly ended. I came racing out onto a barren roadway bathed in moonlight and stopped. Through the cracking of branches behind me, I heard a far more mundane sound. That of rushing water, and a lot of it. I saw a bridge passing over a rather tumultuous part of the river just down the road. The water wasn't quiet at rapid speeds, but they could certainly run faster than me. I only hoped the demon was unable to swim. It burst through the tree line as I approached the bridge. I knew it was a risk. The flat road wouldn't delay the creature as the woodland thicket had, but there was no other choice. I ran with all my might, forgetting the pain in my legs and lungs, feet hammering against the asphalt. Behind came a thunderous choir of footsteps that shook the earth and stirred the air. The road quaked with such ferocity it became hard to keep my footing. I could imagine quite well what would happen if that strength was turned on me. I had seen the bodies. The image was fresh in my mind as I ran, and gave me just enough motivation to make it to the bridge. There was part of me relieved at the victory, and so many more than wanted to grasp that feeling. Had I listened to them, I would not be here to recount this. I did not slow as I hiked up the bridge, although my progress had been accompanied by the creatures. It was close now, more so than I feared it ever would be. I could feel the wind generated by its swiping limbs brushing against my neck. Sometimes I swore there was even a claw plucking at the hairs. But I was close, so close. I could see the edge of the bridge and hear the roaring water below. Just a few more steps, that's all it would take. 3 more, 2 more, 1, and then jump. I was in the air. I was free. All I had to do was let gravity take me, but the fall never came. My shirt snagged under my armpits as something snatched me up by the collar. A million fingers gripped the fabric, and a shifting shadow passed over me. I didn't need to look up to see that smile unfurling ad infinitum. Already I spied spindly hands reaching down to tear me apart. I had done most of the job for them after all, bringing myself right to the river for prompt disposal. I could see it all play out before me. Tomorrow, they'd find my mangled body washed up somewhere. Then, the papers would come saying, Red River Ripper murders local doctor. And my body would be swept away to make room for more victims. It wouldn't just take my life, it'd lose my name. Fear turned to rage as such a thought crossed my mind. I looked up the creature and the impossible shapes it took, my gaze alight with utter fury. I may not have killed it, but I could deny it one more victim, and everything that was mine. I raised my knife one more time, and in one quick slash, severed the part of my shirt it grasped. The other arm shot out to grab me, but the shock of my escape delayed them long enough for the river to take me. The cold of the water struck me like lightning, and after the initial shock caused my focus to lapse. I had just enough strength to break the surface. Not to breathe, of course, but to see what may be following me. I spied the bridge, already a mere speck in the distance, and atop it stood the creature. It never moved to follow, even from the shoreline. It simply stood there, holding the only piece of me it would ever get. "Fuck you!" I remember shouting, overcome by my feeling of triumph. I win! I win! It was a moment I savor even to this day. Rare is it that I find such ecstasy even from my victims. It was the greatest victory I've ever known, but it was not yet complete. I floated on the river for hours, letting it carry me far away from the creature, until the sun finally rose. Only then, when I felt the monster could not find me, I drifted to the river's edge and crawled ashore. I had been swept miles away to a town just south of my starting point. It was a tiny place as insignificant as the dirt blowing through its streets, but thankfully had a police station in town. I remember marching through the door, dragging river water with every step, finding the nearest officer and saying, "Greetings, I am the Red River Ripper. Would you be so kind as to arrest me?" They didn't believe me, of course, but it was easy to convince them. I outlined my crimes in exquisite detail and took them out to see my trailer. Despite the damage, there was enough evidence within to finally arrest me. I plead guilty at the trial and was, to the shock of no one, sentenced to death. News spread fast of my crimes and the chilling efficiency with which they were undertaken. It was undeniable who I was and what I had done. I couldn't have asked for more. But that was not the best part. The 10 men whom the creature had killed were all attributed to me, and I was more than happy to accept such an honor. I hope that creature, whatever it was, knows what I did, and I hope it hates me for it. Maybe it will come for me. I see no reason why it could not. Perhaps it will disguise itself as one of the guards, or even the inmates. Perhaps no. Why be subtle when such a tremendous insult has been delivered? After all, I'm a dead man already. I would at least want to die knowing how great of a wound I delivered. It has not come, however. The days have grown old, and yet here I am, rotting in a cell. I wonder if it does not care like I do. Perhaps it was simply a bloodthirsty animal. Perhaps what it did was simply a means of covering its tracks, or even worse, an accident. I fear it does not think of me. It is now 6 months since my conviction. The media attention my crimes assumed has died down. Now, I doubt any of you know who the Red River Ripper even is. This is why I write this now. I have made friends with a group of smugglers in my prison. If they are true to their word, they will find some way to make this message public. I do not know if I will leave to see it published, though the hope that someone may yet see this gives me a drive like nothing I have ever known. To whomever finds this, I leave you with this. I have killed a great many people. For their sakes, do not forget me or what I did. And if any you are to run across a beast with bodies upon bodies coalescing within, kill it, and in its last moments, remind it of me. Let the last thought on that monster's mind be me.